What happens when two of Hollywood's biggest icons, one a screen legend whose performances have defined generations, the other a fearless daytime host known for never backing down, face off live in front of a studio audience? What unfolded that day wasn't just an interview. It was a clash of personalities, philosophies, and legacies, leaving viewers riveted, the studio breathless, and the internet buzzing for weeks. Before we dive into this unforgettable confrontation, make sure you subscribe to Prime Narrator and tap that like button so you don't miss any of these jaw-dropping Hollywood moments. And as you watch, I want to know in the comments, whose perspective resonates with you the most in this legendary showdown? That morning, the set of The View was buzzing with an energy that was almost tangible. The lights burned brighter than usual, the cameras rolled, and the audience's excitement was mixed with the kind of nervous anticipation that signals something extraordinary is about to happen. After all, it wasn't every day that Meryl Streep, widely regarded as one of the greatest actresses of all time, stepped into the unpredictable environment of live daytime television. Streep walked in wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit, elegant, refined, yet carrying an unmistakable sharpness. Her expression was calm, composed, almost serene. But her eyes told a different story. There was a tension there, a sense that this encounter was going to be more than a routine interview. At the center of the panel sat Whoopi Goldberg, adjusting her glasses and leaning slightly forward, her eyes fixed on Streep. These two had a history, a subtle, layered tension shaped by years in the same industry, occasionally overlapping interviews, and a silent rivalry that neither had ever fully addressed in public. Today, that tension would finally surface. The first few minutes went as smoothly as could be expected. The host asked Streep about her latest film, and she responded with her trademark poise, speaking with the grace and warmth fans have come to admire over decades. The audience relaxed slightly, thinking perhaps the segment would stay lighthearted and easygoing. But soon the conversation began to shift. The topic turned toward Hollywood controversies, accountability, representation, and the way power operates behind the scenes. It was a subject the show thrives on, but it's also a minefield, and the atmosphere in the studio subtly shifted. Everyone knew they were about to witness something far from ordinary. Whoopi leaned back, her voice carrying that familiar mix of humor and steel. "Meryl, you've often been called a voice of conscience in Hollywood, but some people feel like you've stayed quiet on the biggest issues. Do you think you've spoken up enough when it counted?" The room seemed to pause. Even the air felt heavier. The audience shuffled slightly, sensing the spark that might ignite something bigger. Streep's calm smile faltered for just a moment. She drew a slow, deliberate breath before replying, "I've always believed in speaking through my work. I don't think shouting the loudest always changes the world. Sometimes it's the stories you tell that do." Whoopi's eyebrows lifted, her head tilting slightly, a small, knowing smile appearing. "That's a nice answer," she said with a hint of challenge. "But don't you think silence can sometimes look like complicity?" The audience murmured. The tension stretched across the studio like an invisible wire. Streep's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice dropping in volume but gaining intensity. "Silence," she said carefully, "is not the same as complicity. And I don't think anyone gets to decide what someone else's silence means." The energy in the room shifted palpably. The usual chatter and laughter faded into a heavy, almost tangible hush. The host tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but it was clear the dynamic had changed. Two giants were now facing off under the glare of the lights. Whoopi leaned in slightly, her tone edged with steel. "I'm not deciding for you, Meryl. I'm asking a question people want answered. When things were breaking down in the industry, when young actors were speaking out, some of us were making noise. Some weren't. Where were you?" Streep leaned forward, her composure sharpening into defiance. "Some of us," she said, "were fighting battles you never saw, quietly behind the scenes without cameras. Sometimes the work that matters most is the work that goes unseen." The audience was utterly silent. A woman in the second row covered her mouth as if to stifle a gasp. The moderator attempted to regain control, but it was clear. This was no longer a friendly interview. It was two seasoned professionals sparring on the world's most visible stage. Whoopi's voice dropped slightly, carrying a low, pointed edge. Sometimes quiet battles don't change a damn thing. Streep's calm exterior cracked just enough for a flicker of anger to appear. That, she replied deliberately, is easy to say when your career is built on talking. Not everyone needs a stage to make a difference. Gas echoed through the audience. Some clapped, then immediately stopped, unsure if it was appropriate. The camera zoomed out, capturing both women in the same frame. Streep poised but visibly simmering, Whoopi unflinching, her smile a subtle challenge. This was live television at its most electric. Then almost softly, Whoopi added, "Funny thing about stories, Meryl. They only matter if people believe you still care." Streep parted her lips as if to respond, then stopped. The audience sat frozen, realizing that this wasn't just a disagreement. It was a philosophical clash, a collision of legacies. Every subtle gesture, every pause amplified the tension. When the moderator tried again to shift gears, Streep leaned in, voice steady but sharp. "For someone who's spent years telling people to listen, you don't seem all that interested in hearing the quiet ways people make change. Not everyone wants applause for doing what's right." Whoopi's smile hinted at frustration. "I hear you, Meryl. But the world moves when people get loud. Staying quiet may feel noble, but sometimes it just looks safe, and safe doesn't change anything." Streep's hands folded in front of her, grounding herself. "Safe? Do you think it was safe to confront studios as a young actress? To demand respect on sets when it wasn't fashionable? Courage doesn't always make headlines." The audience reacted with murmurs of agreement and shock. The tension in the room was almost physical, as though the air itself were holding its breath. Whoopi leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "I get it. But history isn't enough. When the world needed someone to speak up, we didn't always see you there. On stage, behind cameras, somewhere the public could notice. Where were you?" Streep pressed her lips together for a moment, then spoke, measured and calm. "I was in rooms you weren't invited to. I was helping people no one will ever hear about. Making a difference isn't about applause, it's about effectiveness." The audience's reaction was immediate, a mix of soft murmurs of approval and uneasy glances at Whoopi, waiting for her response. "You're right," Whoopi said, voice softer now but firm. "Quiet can be noble, but sometimes it feels like distance. And when people think the ones they admire aren't showing up, that's hard to forgive." Streep's voice dropped lower, deliberate and unwavering. "I care. I've always cared, but I won't apologize for the way I do it. I won't perform my good deeds to satisfy someone else's idea of what matters." A few scattered claps emerged from the audience, hesitant but genuine. Whoopi leaned forward slightly, voice calm but edged with challenge. "I've never been afraid of applause or criticism. I'd rather take the heat than let people think I'm doing nothing." The energy in the room shifted again. This was personal now, philosophical and intimate. Streep's hands tightened slightly on the table, her gaze unwavering. "Sometimes it's not about being the loudest voice. Sometimes it's about listening, even when it's inconvenient." Whoopi looked directly at her, eyes steady. "We've admired you, Meryl. But admiration isn't trust, and when people needed your voice, it wasn't always there." Streep's reply was measured but carried the weight of decades of experience. "Maybe you didn't hear me because you weren't listening. Not all work is public. I won't be shamed for doing things my way." The audience erupted in applause, some spontaneous, some faltering, unsure which side to take. The studio felt less like a talk show set and more like an arena where two masters sparred, not with swords, but with words. Finally, the moderator called a break, but the tension didn't fade. As the lights dimmed and the crew hustled, Streep leaned toward Whoopi, voice low. "This isn't about today. It's about years of history, isn't it?" Whoopi didn't answer directly, but the audience leaned in, sensing the layers of unspoken conflict. When the cameras returned, the set seemed calm, but the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Streep's posture remained perfect, but her fingers betrayed a slight tremor. Whoopi's gaze was focused, ready for the next round. The moderator tried to transition, but Streep quietly interjected. "Passionate is one word for it." Whoopi addressed the viewers at home. "This isn't me versus Meryl. It's about what people expect from those they admire. When the world's on fire, they don't just want performances, they want action. They want to know someone they respect is showing up. Streep exhaled softly. And if coming down from that pedestal means losing the ability to reach people at all? Stories have power. That's why we tell them, the audience murmured again, caught between two powerful perspectives. In that moment, it was clear. This was not a television segment. It was a rare, unscripted glimpse of two legends revealing themselves. Raw, honest, and unforgettable. A few times, yes, I've spoken up. But there's a difference between telling a story and standing up when the people who believed in your stories are out there fighting for their lives. Stories inspire, but real, present voices, those can actually save. For a brief moment, Meryal's lips parted, as if she might reply immediately, but she paused, clearly weighing every word. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, quieter, intimate in a way that drew the audience in. I've stood up more times than anyone will ever know. I just never felt the need to turn it into a headline. There were dinners I left because the people in power didn't respect the women on my set. Scripts I turned down because people weren't treated with basic dignity. I didn't need applause for those choices. I just needed to do them, the audience murmured again, a little louder this time. Some nodded, some shook their heads as if trying to process the weight of her words. Whoopi remained steady, her gaze unflinching. Then why not tell those stories, she asked. Why allow people to think you were silent? Don't you think the young women out there, fighting for their place in this industry, would have wanted to know they weren't alone? That someone like you had their back? That question landed heavier than the rest. Meryl blinked, a flicker of vulnerability passing across her face. The silence that followed seemed almost physical, dense, as if even the studio cameras were hesitant to break it. Finally, she spoke again, her tone softer, but layered with unmistakable pain. Because the moment you tell the world, it stops being about the people you helped. It becomes about you, and that's never why I did it. A few tentative claps rose from the audience, heartfelt but careful. Whoopi shifted slightly, resting her elbows on the table. For the first time that morning, her voice softened, disarmed, if only a little. I understand that. I really do. But you have to admit, sometimes silence feels like absence. And that absence, it leaves scars. The weight of that line seemed to pierce Meryal's careful walls. Her fingers flexed slightly on the table, and for the first time her voice wavered. Do you think I don't carry scars too? Do you think it was easy to stay in an industry that treated women as disposable? Even as I fought to keep telling stories that mattered, don't mistake my restraint for apathy. I care. I've always cared. The audience was utterly still now, as if realizing they weren't witnessing a battle of egos, but the collision of two deeply personal histories. Whoopi's expression softened further, the sharp edge of her eyes dulling into reflection. I know you care. I never doubted that. I wish you had shown it in a way that reached the people who needed it most. Because whether you like it or not, Meryl, you've always been more than an actress to them. You were hope, the word hung in the air like a fragile ornament, shimmering between them. Meryal's gaze softened, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. Hope can take many forms. Sometimes it's a speech, sometimes a film, and sometimes it's the quiet act of showing up for someone who thinks no one else will. A wave of applause swept through the audience this time, unrestrained, as though they had been waiting for this moment of vulnerability to emerge. But just as the energy seemed to soften, Whoopi leaned forward once more, her voice firm. Then tell us now, Meryl. Tell them what you've done that they don't know about, because people out there want to believe, but belief needs proof. The challenge landed like a drumbeat in the still room. The audience leaned forward, collectively holding its breath. Meryl hesitated, a rare uncertainty crossing her face. Her eyes flicked briefly to the crowd, then back to Whoopi. I've never shared these things publicly, she began quietly, because they weren't about me. But if it helps people understand, she paused, inhaling slowly, steadying herself. There was a young actress once, barely 20, terrified. She'd been harassed by a producer everyone feared. I went to the studio. I threatened to walk off the film unless he was removed. They did. No one ever knew why he disappeared from the project. No one thanked me. But that young woman still sends me a card every year. That's enough. A collective gasp followed, along with scattered applause. Whoopi blinked, shifting from guardedness to respect, though she maintained a calm tone. Why didn't you tell that story before? Meryal's eyes glistened. Because it wasn't my story to tell. It was hers. The audience responded with a deeper, more reflective kind of applause. Admiration, not excitement. The moderator, sensing the shift in energy, spoke gently. This is what the conversation should be about. Understanding, not judgment. But Whoopi wasn't finished. She leaned in, firm but thoughtful. Maybe that's the real issue, Meryl. We don't tell these stories until years later. And in the meantime, so many others suffer quietly, thinking they're alone. That's why loud voices are necessary. That's why I've never been afraid to speak, even when it cost me. Meryl gave a slight nod, recognition flickering between them. Perhaps they had just been fighting the same fight in different ways. The audience erupted in applause again, louder this time, acknowledging that beneath the tension, there was a shared purpose. Even as the claps faded, a sense of unfinished business lingered in the air. Whoopi's voice returned, quiet but unwavering. You fought your battles in the dark. I fought mine in the light. Maybe today is the first time we've really met in the middle. Meryl offered a faint smile, tinged with relief and fatigue. Maybe so. The camera captured them, locking eyes. No longer adversaries, not quite allies. Two legacies intersecting. The moderator, sensing the moment, said softly, "We'll be right back after this break, but I think we've just witnessed something rare, something honest." Backstage, whispers confirmed it. This moment would go viral. The studio buzzed, the audience still processing. When the cameras returned, the atmosphere was thick, electric. Meryl Streep leaned forward, hands intertwined, calm restored but born from exhaustion. Whoopi leaned back, arms crossed, in quiet contemplation. The moderator spoke softly. We've discussed courage and silence, speaking out and working behind the scenes. What comes next? How do we use these lessons? Meryl paused, reflecting inwardly. We stopped seeing each other as enemies simply because we chose different paths to the same goal. Loud versus quiet, visible versus invisible. It's not about whose way is right. The real challenge is in never giving up applause, followed, gentle and affirming. Whoopi leaned forward, conviction in her voice. I can live with that. But if we want to inspire the next generation, we have to show that disagreement doesn't equal disunity. You can fight in the shadows or in the light. We're still fighting for the same thing. Soft cheers filled the studio. The mood had shifted toward catharsis. Yes, Meryl agreed. And maybe we need to listen more before judging what others do. A small smile crossed. Other, not as rivals, but two kinds of fighters on the same side. Weeks later, studio staff recalled the morning. The stage manager, I've been here 15 years. I've never seen an audience so quiet. A camera operator, I thought I was filming a talk show. I ended up capturing history. The images remained. The steel in Meryl's eyes, Whoopi's unwavering gaze. Not the end of disagreement, not a perfect resolution, but real. And sometimes real is exactly what people need. Meryl's words to the audience, you don't have to shout to matter, but don't let fear keep you silent. Find your way and do it with integrity. Whoopi added, don't wait for permission. Speak even if your voice shakes. And when you see someone fighting quietly, respect that too. A standing ovation followed. A glance across the table, unspoken acknowledgement, agreement in principle, not method. Cameras zoom for the final shot. The moderator, this conversation will continue, but we hope it inspires you to talk, act, and listen. And as clips spread online, debates flared, hashtags trended. But the real story wasn't the confrontation. It was the meeting of two forms of courage, loud and quiet. Both voices mattered. Both changed the world. Professionalism. Wahlberg said he respects journalism, but values boundaries. Strawn said he respects all guests, but believes in honesty above convenience. Both sounded calm, measured, and reflective. Proof that, at the end of the day, neither man let the tension define them. Still, that interview left a mark. It became a reference point for conversations about how modern media functions. How much is genuine curiosity and how much is performance? That fine line between truth and entertainment was exposed for everyone to see, in my opinion. Looking back, that segment wasn't just about Wahlberg or Strawn. It was about a moment when live TV accidentally mirrored something larger. It showed how easily control can slip, how fast comfort turns to confrontation, and how two people can interpret the same exchange in completely different ways. For Wahlberg, it was about maintaining dignity and control of his story. For Strawn, it was about transparency and accountability to the audience. Both intentions were valid, yet the collision between them created something unpredictable. That unpredictability, that human imperfection, is what made it so unforgettable, in my opinion. In the end, both men walked away with reputations intact, but the audience walked away with something more. A glimpse of what happens when real emotion breaks through the television gloss. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. And in an age where so much feels rehearsed, that authenticity, even when uncomfortable, is what keeps people talking long after the credits roll.